Welcome to South of Left Field. My name is Jimmy, and I'm going to be carrying on again today about inequality. Now, last go round, I talked about how I was distressed by inequality, and at the end, I alluded to the fact that inequality is something that has been controlled in the past. Now, to begin with, I'd like to talk about how inequality is just a simple byproduct of human nature. Okay, I know a lot of the people today will probably think, oh, capitalism, that's the cause behind inequality. Capitalism is generally believed to have started around the 17th century. And this book, and this gentleman here, he took a tour of the world. He took a tour of the world going back to the earliest evidence of human civilization. He looked at humanity on every continent, every era, every ethnicity, under every form of government, and under any and all religions, although he didn't really call them out as looking for religious influences. But what he found was inequality has always existed. It predated the formation of capitalism in the 17th century. Probably one of the most unequal empires as far as inequality goes was the Roman Empire, which of course started back, before Christ. So, yeah, inequality is rooted in human nature. Now, society, and we are a hierarchical societal people. I mean, humanity survived and thrived because we learned to cooperate and live in groups. You can take a couple dozen kids, throw them out on a playground together and watch a society form, or several societies form. There will be leaders, there will be followers, there will be rebels, they'll reflect what we've recreated all around the world time and again. So inequality is part of human nature. Now, all stable societies identify troubling behaviors, troubling facets of human nature, things such as, theft, rape, murder, stuff like that. You can't have a stable society if people can just wander around doing that anytime they feel like it, so you pass laws and you regulate it. Well, somehow we just have not recognized the tendency to accumulate, to create and take wealth away from the society as a whole into your personal grasp, even to the point of impoverishing the other members of the society. We haven't recognized that behavior yet as something to be regulated. And regulating that behavior, that is how you go about putting a brake on and reversing inequality. One early example of that would be in Athens in ancient Greece. Now let's go back to the dawn of democracy. Everybody seems to think democracy is such a great thing. Let's go back to where it first began to appear. Athens militarily was in trouble. They had a problem. They were not doing well on the battlefield. So the leadership, the government, if you will, of Athens at the time, realized that they really needed to engage their citizenry. They had to get people motivated. They had to get people unified behind them. And one of the tools that they took to use was extending the right to vote, giving people a voice in their government. Democracy. And it worked. It really worked because they extended the right to vote to more and more members of the citizenry, and they passed tax laws and they taxed their wealthy to fund care for the general population. They taxed them to pay for the warfare and for the maintenance and building of ships. And what happened was Athens turned around and became the preeminent power dominating much of Greek history. As long as the government took care of the people, as long as there were programs to take care of the people, as long as the wealth was being redistributed from the upper class down toward the lower class in the forms of programs and pay, people had skin in the game, folks. They took to the oars and they took to the spear, and they kicked butt. Athens became a great nation. Now, in the First World War, something similar went on in Britain. The circumstances were a little bit different, but they were confronted by something that Athens was confronted by, and that was a need for everybody to get involved in the war. This was not war like they were used to, where you just had a ruler wandering around with a mediocre little army that was pretty much impressed or conscripted, fighting their little battles in out of the way places. You didn't have to have the resources of the entire nation. But World War I ate men and ate material like a beast. They needed everybody. They needed millions in the trenches. They needed millions in the factories. People had to be committed to the war effort. And complicating it from the perspective of their politicians was this new thing on the scene, communism. Communism, which pointed the finger at the upper class and said, these are the people that exploit you. Why would you fight a war to make them richer? It's not your war. It's their war. And this, of course, led to the communist revolution in Russia and the execution of many of the nobles and the execution of the Tsar and his entire family. And so the politicians in Britain are looking at war weariness. They're looking at a growing interest in their own population in communism. They realize that they've been just, getting their people slaughtered hand over fist trying to win this war. People had to have a reason to fight. They had to have an answer if they didn't want to end up like the Tsar. They had to have an answer if they didn't want Britain to go communist. That is just one of the major considerations that they were confronted with. So, what changed? Well, the British vote used to be confined to males 21 years of older who owned land. That changed. It suddenly became all males 21 and older. The vote for women followed 10 years later. But they expanded the vote. They did what Athens did. They began to give people a voice inside the government. And they looked at the sources of wealth like Athens did. And they began taxing heavily. High incomes. The higher the income, the heavier the tax. They looked at all of these massive troves of wealth. The great estates and, ginormous mansions. And they said, well, hey, all of this stuff, we're going to have to start taking this wealth and we're going to have to start using it for our people. We're going to start using it for the war effort. And so people found two things going on. One, the government was starting to take care of them. The government was starting to take notice. The government gave them the right to vote because now they changed the rules in 1918. You didn't have to be a landowner to vote anymore. All you had to be was a 21-year-old man. And suddenly, people had more skin in the game. Let's use that term again. It became our government. You were invested. You had a reason to fight. Now, this points up a dynamic in two regards. One, people becoming active in their government. People being first given a voice and then using a voice will, two, drive that government to start passing laws and regulations and setting up tax codes and limitations that will benefit the general population at the expense of the wealthy. Now, people are going to say, oh, you're talking class warfare. That's terrible. Okay, let's go back to our playground example. We got the one kid out of 10. He's the upper class. Now, he came out of 2019 with $7 of the wealth, 70% of the entire nation's wealth in his hands. And the other 9 only had 30%. And that was a trend. 30 years before, it had been 6-4. Now it's 7-3. And it's still developing that way. And so what we have is growing inequality. And as the wealth accumulation changes, that's just a reflection of the change in income. The 90%, the general population, we are America. Okay? Remember, America is its citizens. The 90% have less wealth and less income every year. Why is this? Well, let's look at it from the perspective of class. If you want to take that playground example and you want to see the lot of the 9 improve, there's only one place the money can come from. It's got to come from the people who've accumulated it. It's got to come from the 1. It's got to come from the upper class. Class warfare is a fact. And class warfare can move in 2 broad directions. It can be violent or it can be done through government regulation. And here is where we run into the problem. Our government is staffed by members of the elite class. You go wandering up on Capitol Hill and try and find somebody from our class. There's going to be an odd stray here and there. But inevitably what you're going to see is you're going to see members of the upper class sitting in office. And you're going to see members of the upper class lobbying them. And you're going to see two political parties who are also staffed by members of the upper class. Parties that are funded by the upper class. These parties are incapable of doing anything that would reverse the concentration of wealth. If you walk up to Capitol Hill and you say, I want to change the tax laws and I want to change the inheritance laws and I want to change the regulation on how business goes about it, conducting itself, and I want to raise the minimum wage. Let's start doing things to move some of the income out of the hands of the upper class into the hands of the 90%. You're going to find a wall of resistance, and it won't matter which party you talk to, because it is not in their vested interest to see us rise in wealth or income. It is in their vested interest to see their wealth and their income increase. The masters that fund these two parties will have it no other way. Folks, it's a class war. And you better understand that the salvation of the American people, the salvation of America, if it is going to be found, will not be found in the Republican Party, and it will not be found in the Democratic Party. They've both been around for 150 years and more. They are a party of the upper class, by the upper class, and for the upper class in its entirety. And these parties, watch the Democratic Party with Bernie Sanders, they will self-destruct before they let anybody who champions the lower class into power, any power. So you want to fight back? You've got to go to the third parties. And here's the other thing. Stop paying so much attention to the race for the presidency. The presidency doesn't pass the law. You've got to have Congress. On that note, I'm going to lay off of it for this. And I hope you'll be back to hear some more of, well, this angry old white man's got to say. Thank you for listening.